my mom is probably watching us right now. She's 76 years old in San Diego, and she would say, "What are you guys saying? Everyone's going to play video games in the future?" And like, what do you get? What do you say to that reaction when people say we're all going to be at home playing video games? That's the future of humanity.
Well, first of all, I don't think that your mom, certainly my mom, would have thought that we'd be all sitting on desks on a computer, right? you know, and if someone took a photo of where we are today in our working environment and then sent it back 50 years ago and said, "This is the future," probably everyone would say, "Oh my goodness, we're all zombies staring at these weird tubes that look like a television, and we're going to be stuck there just doing this," right? Which is what we do, right? So, I would say that, while we can't imagine where it is, actually, to me, this is just an extension of what we already do today, except instead of looking at a PowerPoint and at an Excel and at a spreadsheet and some Word docs, we're actually engaging in a very rich world that has a lot of interesting things happening in there, which could have, the boring stuff, but can also have the actual sort of fun stuff embedded. And so I actually think our entire interaction model will change, because now we are not bounded by those physical limitations, because actually humans are very much about imagination and creativity, right? And so this tube that we're looking through, that lens that we look through, when you look at it externally, it might feel terrifying. But actually, when you're inside it, it's very, very rich, because your mind is active, right? Your imagination and your creativity is just flowing. And so you can actually do a lot more things, and you can actually just think about what the computer did just to work productivity, right? Despite the fact that we can't physically move, we're sitting in front of the computer, and yet we have superpowers as compared to, the generations before us, right? Because we have the computer, but yet we don't need to walk there. We don't need to be physically there. We don't need to interact that way. And yet our productivity and our capabilities are amplified because of that. So this is going to be the world of gaming. We will be amplified in our capacity, but in our creative capacity, because we can do stuff. Education is an interesting example where we've been training our children to fit a world that frankly is in the past. And all the things we're learning are really sort of not what the future needs, but we do it because, we think that's where the world is, because, schools tend to teach the past, not the future. That's just the way they're constructed. But, in this thing here, we're really, all sitting on those computers, so-called playing video games or engaging in these worlds like Sandbox, where you're creating assets. And it's actually really creative activity that you're doing. And you're doing creativity without specific limitations. I think of the potential there to be much more richer. And I'm also saying that we're not just playing one world. We're actually able to play a multitude of worlds and a multitude of experiences, because we can hop in and out wherever we want to. I think the world actually, ought to be celebrating more diversity, which is really, if you think about it, the hub of innovation comes from, diverse inputs and diversity. But, because of what's happened, we end up really being siloed into these areas. Centralization has homogenized culture, right? When in fact, culture should be much more free. Growing up in the 80s, there was music everywhere. Every other week, there was some one-hit wonder that emerged, right? And then disappeared, right? But we were exposed to different types of music and different types of stuff. Today, I go to Spotify. It's like Spotify is telling me what I should listen to. And as a result, actually, it's started to homogenize, for instance, music or other forms of culture, because we're all consuming the same thing, when in fact, maybe that's not how the future should look like.
I think you once said life is a game when people asked you about how it plugs into gaming. I thought it was a great point. And I mean, and I was having this conversation with one of our booking guys right now, and I said, well, we've got someone who works for us virtually and helps us book guests. I said, if they book Yat, then that's a big win. And we're like, wow, that's really good. And they do a great preparation for it, then that's a big win. And then we'll send them some tokens known as dollars and say, great work. And I asked my book, I said, how is that any different than someone playing Axie? They've been creative, they've come up with a strategy, they got delivered some value, and they got some points that are now tradable on the blockchain or on the Sandbox. So again, when people start looking at it this way, you can say that, yeah, you're parked in front of a computer, you're giving your energy, your ideas, your creativity. How is a game any different than your virtual workplace or even your interactions with Facebook, et cetera? It all becomes very much the same thing, especially when you have it connect back to real world assets via the blockchain and NFTs that you can now take out of the game And I think you once said assets should exist to support the game as opposed to games that exist to support the assets, I think is what you're saying. I might have got that wrong. But the way you're talking about this future is you can take your assets and go from experience to experience, and that the games of the future need to cater to those transferable assets. Is that this future vision that makes you super excited in what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so we think NFTs are the center of the experience. A few years ago, we coined this term where we said, because of NFTs and blockchain, content will become the platform. And what that means, what we're saying there is that we will build and experience things because we own these assets and because people will build stuff for us because they want to tap into us, which is very different from the way we experience content today. We experience content or we experience virtual goods, in games as support assets inside those games, right? Because of the fact that the game itself doesn't actually care about the value of the assets. The assets exist to support the game, right? So that's all it is, which means it's disposable, right? And therefore, you can always nerf it, because if it doesn't serve the purpose of the game, as in the gameplay, which is the purpose to make money for the game studio, right? Then we have to change it, right? And that's because games obviously they serve a minority, which is about making money for the game studio, and therefore everything in there is valueless. Now, in an environment where you own the asset itself, in order to bring a customer into your environment, you need to demonstrate that this is a valuable experience to you. How do you do that? By basically showing that you offer value to the assets that you might already have, above and beyond you buying some new assets. This is no different than someone sending you an invitation because you own a Ferrari. Why do they send you an invitation? Because you own a Ferrari, and you know what? You probably like fast cars, and you probably got a bunch of money. So let me go and pitch to you, this Piaget watch, for instance. Yeah? That happens all the time because they associate what you own and therefore offering you value-added services, which you may or may not have asked for because they want you as a customer. And so in this future, this is already playing out. If you have a Bored Ape, you're a desirable customer. If you're CryptoPunk, maybe even more desirable, right? If you're a sandbox landowner, let me pitch you all these other land deals because you know what? I think you might like this better, right? This is where I think it's going to happen as a consumer experience. It's more powerful because people will come to me. And also the gravity of the assets, if I own them, I want to make sure that the assets have even at least retained, if not increase their value. What am I going to do? I'm going to encourage as a community that more game environments use them and interact with them because it's good for me as well. Right? So I think it creates a very nice virtual cycle of value where you can build a game that has community ownership, and these assets, the more free they are and the more they travel, the better it is for all communities, frankly speaking. Right? But this is a model that doesn't work for game companies because right now, because they're not on blockchain, they don't have a way in which value can be transferred back to them. So every time they would allow a user to leave the game through this kind of interoperability, they actually lose that customer. And that's it, right? And so obviously that doesn't work for them. That's why they have to construct, the tallest of walled gardens, if they can, to make sure you can't leave and then just trap you, right? Which is, I grew up in Austria in the 80s. My mom used to work in Germany in music, and she used to work at the Komische Oper. So I crossed the border between East and West Berlin. And the only reason why people from East Berlin couldn't freely move is because there were these tall walls that, at the potential sort of threat of life, if you were trying to sort of leave that. That's basically walled garden environments in the digital world. You don't get killed, but you lose everything, right? If you leave, you are actually saying, okay, I leave, but I have to give up all my time, all my effort, everything I spent in this game, not just money, but social value, everything. That's the trap they built for us.